Part 1. Shame. Harper hadn't been home in over a decade, not since the argument that shattered the fragile peace between her and her mother, Tessa. It had started with a simple disagreement. Harper had come home from college with questions, doubts about her faith, and a new independence that clashed with the certainty Tessa held so tightly. Tessa quoted scripture. Harper pushed back. Words piled up. Accusations flared. Harper felt judged. Tessa felt rejected. In the end, neither of them listened, and Harper left, slamming the door behind her, thinking she'd never return. It was Thanksgiving week, and the air was sharp with cold. Her apartment smelled like reheated noodles and unopened mail. The radiator rattled with effort but barely warmed the corners of the small studio she called home. Outside, the streets bustled with early holiday traffic. Inside, Harper sat cross-legged on the worn couch, staring at a pile of envelopes that had collected dust on the coffee table. Near the bottom was one she'd been avoiding. Not because she didn't recognize it, she did instantly, but because she wasn't ready to face what it might say. She was afraid it would stir everything back up. The guilt, the anger, the ache of missing someone you've spent years trying not to miss. Opening it felt like risking her fragile detachment, like peeling off a scab she had tried too hard to ignore. A soft cream envelope, the kind people rarely used anymore. Addressed in familiar handwriting, elegant, loopy, with a small cross drawn at the end of her name. Her mother's mark. She had received the letter days ago, but she hadn't opened it. There had been others before this. Letters Tessa sent every few months, especially near the holidays or on Harper's birthday. Some were long, some short. Some just a Bible verse with a heart drawn beside it. Harper had stopped reading them after the second year, stopped replying after the first. She told herself she didn't need anything from the past. She had moved on, built a life, found work, friends, independence. But in the quiet moments, it still hurt. And every time she saw that familiar script, she remembered the last words they had exchanged. The memory was sharp, even now. Tessa had said, "If you walk away now, don't expect me to chase you." And Harper had fired back, "Good, I don't want you to." There were things Harper still couldn't forget, words spoken in anger, accusations that cut deep, silence that settled like dust between them. She had come home from college one winter, confused, questioning her faith, unsure of what she believed anymore. She needed her mom to listen, to hold space for the doubt, the changes, the questions. But instead, she was met with disappointment. Not cruelty, just the sharp ache of unmet expectations. Tessa, ever firm in her convictions, had leaned on scripture and prayer when Harper needed warmth and grace. One argument turned into two, then three. Harper couldn't remember every word, but she remembered yelling, "You only love me when I agree with you," and her mother snapping back, "That's not true, and you know it." The heat behind it, the sting of being misunderstood, had never fully faded. And then she left. A slammed door, a duffel bag. No goodbye, and no intention of ever coming back. In her mind, she had closed the door for good. On the house, on the relationship, on everything that reminded her of who she had been under her mother's roof. She had been 19. Now she was 31. The years in between had been filled with noise, new jobs, missed rent, city lights, and hollow relationships. She'd dated people who reminded her of everything she thought she wanted. She'd gone to churches that promised belonging but delivered rules. She tried journaling, therapy, the occasional retreat. She told herself she had healed, but something inside her still winced every time she heard the word mother. She knew she wasn't healed because even after all that time, a voicemail from a stranger who sounded like Tessa made her heart race. A childhood photo tucked into an old book could bring her to tears. And every time she saw a mother and daughter laughing in a grocery store aisle, something in her tightened and turned away. There were Saturday mornings she couldn't face, birthdays she forgot on purpose, Holidays she spent scrolling through other people's family photos with a lump in her throat. She avoided them because they reminded her of what she had chosen to walk away from, but never truly stopped longing for. They forced her to confront the empty space she didn't know how to fill. She became an expert at numbing. She learned to fill silences with noise, streaming playlists, busy schedules, endless scrolling. But the ache didn't go away. It just waited, quietly, persistently, for a crack in her defenses. For a song, a scent, a memory strong enough to break through the noise and make her feel it all again. And yet there were moments. Late nights when a worship song caught her off guard. Quiet mornings when she smelled coffee and cinnamon and was taken back to Saturdays at home. Or the time she saw a mother and daughter arguing on the train platform and the mother still reached over to zip her daughter's coat before they parted. Therapists told her to name her pain, to write it down, to forgive. But how do you forgive someone who never apologized the way you needed them to? How do you forgive when you still don't feel understood? That envelope had sat unopened on her table for 5 days. It was the 5th letter she had received this year. Tessa never mentioned the silence between them. Never asked why Harper didn't respond. Never demanded a visit. Only sent pieces of love stitched in ink. Verses, prayers, and sometimes memories. There was one, 2 years ago, that simply read, "Do you remember that time we made snow angels and the neighbor gave us hot chocolate in measuring cups because she didn't own mugs? I do. I miss that laugh of yours." Harper never replied, but she had read that one over and over again. She remembered the scent of fresh snow and nutmeg, the way her cheeks ached from laughter. That day, before all the anger and distance, she had felt safe. Tonight, it was snowing. She stood at her window, arms crossed, watching flakes blur the view of the street lamp below. Her reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered. Tired. Lonely. She thought of Thanksgiving. How most of her friends were flying out to see family. Or had people over. Or had someone. She'd told her coworker she had plans. That was a lie. She couldn't bear the thought of explaining why she'd be alone. Saying she had plans gave her something to hide behind, something to keep her from looking pitiful or broken or unfinished. It was easier to pretend than admit she didn't have anyone to go home to. All she had was boxed stuffing, a single-serving turkey pot pie, and this letter. The silence in the apartment was heavy. The kind of silence that didn't feel like peace. More like waiting. She turned away from the window and sat down. Her hand hovered over the envelope, hesitant. She studied the way her name was written. Even now, her mother's handwriting looked careful. Hopeful. Was it guilt that stopped her from opening it? Or fear that it would say exactly what she always imagined? Don't bother coming back. Or worse. I've stopped waiting. She thought about all the holidays she had missed. All the birthdays ignored. All the calls left unanswered. She thought about the night she turned 25, when her car broke down and she walked 4 miles home in the rain. That night, she had cried for her mother's voice. Not to rescue her, not to judge her, just to hear the comforting words. You're going to be okay. But the pride that had grown over the years was louder than her need. She picked up the phone, and then set it down. She never made that call. And the time she ended a relationship that had slowly drained her. Not because it was explosive or cruel, but because it chipped away at her piece by piece. Quiet criticism, emotional distance, always feeling like she was too much or not enough. She had lost herself trying to earn someone's love, and when it ended, she felt both relief and devastation. There had been no one to call afterward, no voice to say, "You did the right thing." Just quiet, just echoes. But something felt different this year. Not on the outside. Nothing had changed about her apartment, her job, or the loneliness she had grown used to. But inside, there was a deeper ache. a quiet longing that wouldn't let her numb it away this time. For the first time, the pain didn't just feel like punishment. It felt like a pull toward something unfinished, a whisper that maybe it wasn't too late. She was tired, not just physically, soul tired, weary from the burden of unfinished conversations and unreleased grief, tired of pretending she didn't care. And suddenly, the silence didn't feel like waiting. It felt like invitation, like God whispering into the stillness, nudging her heart with a gentle, persistent question. What if you tried again? What if healing could begin right here? She reached for the letter opener, slipped it under the flap. Her fingers trembled. Her breath caught as she unfolded the paper. The words were handwritten, careful, as if Tessa knew this might be the last one. Dear Harper, I know it's been a long time, and I know I may have been wrong about how I handled things. I wish I had listened more. I wish I had loved better, but I never stopped praying for you. This Thanksgiving, I'll be setting the table for 3. Me, the Lord, and you. Just in case you decide to come home. Love always, Mom. Harper blinked at the words. Her throat tightened. She read it again, and then again, each time slower. The table for 3. She imagined it instantly. The faded lace tablecloth, the chipped floral plates, the flicker of candlelight. She could almost smell the cinnamon rolls her mom always made from scratch, even when money was tight. She pictured Tessa, alone in the kitchen, folding napkins, humming to herself, setting the 3rd place with gentle hope. Hope that her daughter might walk through the door again. Hope that love could bridge the silence. Hope that grace, however delayed, could still arrive. Her eyes burned. Harper hadn't cried in months, but she cried now. She clutched the letter like it might float away if she let go. She didn't know what this meant yet. She didn't know if she was ready to respond, to forgive, to return. But something had shifted. It wasn't just the letter or the loneliness. It was the way her heart responded this time. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Instead of running, she sat with it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that maybe the story wasn't finished, that maybe healing didn't have to come all at once. It could begin with one soft, trembling yes. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on her nightstand. Then she sat back down, hugged her knees to her chest, and let herself feel the ache she had kept buried for so long. Because grief is love with nowhere to go. It lingers in the empty spaces, in the unsent texts, the birthdays not celebrated, the prayers whispered into pillows at 2 a.m. It doesn't disappear. It just waits for permission to be felt, for a moment like this, when the walls come down and the heart finally opens. And sometimes shame just needs a place to be seen before it can be released. It doesn't vanish in a moment. It unravels slowly when it's met with gentleness. When someone dares to say, I still love you, even when you're not proud of who you've been. For Harper, just opening that letter was like pulling the curtain back on a part of her heart she had kept locked away. And once the light hit it, the healing finally began. She turned off the lights, crawled under the covers, and let the tears fall freely. No distractions, no excuses, just her and God and a letter from her mother. And that's where we leave her, in a quiet apartment, letter in hand, grief unraveling. Not yet ready to leave, not yet ready to go back, but ready to feel. Because sometimes the first step toward grace is simply letting it in. End of part 1. Shame. Stay tuned for part 2. Struggle. The journey back isn't easy. Part 2. Struggle. Shame, struggle, and showing up. A daughter's journey back to grace. Harper woke up the next morning with swollen eyes and the letter still on her nightstand. The world outside her window was blanketed in white. Snow fell in lazy, drifting spirals, softening the noise of the city. Her apartment was unusually still. It was Thanksgiving Day. She lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, unsure of what to do with the way she felt. The ache was still there, but it had shifted. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was pull. It was possibility. She sat up slowly, reached for the letter again, and read it one more time. This Thanksgiving, I'll be setting the table for 3. Me, the Lord, and you. The words felt like both invitation and challenge. Invitation because they spoke of welcome, a place already prepared, a seat still saved, a heart still open. But challenge, because stepping into that invitation meant risking rejection, confronting old wounds, and admitting she longed for something she'd spent years trying to live without. She got up and made herself coffee, standing in the silence of her kitchen, staring at the mug in her hands. Her mind was louder than the room. What if it goes badly? What if she doesn't really want me there? What if I show up and I regret it? What if I ruin the peace she's finally found? But louder than all those questions was something she hadn't felt in a long time. What if this is my chance to make peace? She sat down and pulled out her phone, looked up the train schedule. There was one leaving in 2 hours. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her finger hovered over the buy ticket button, frozen between action and avoidance. The time ticking down beside the departure clock made her heart race. Buying the ticket would mean she was going. That this wasn't just a thought experiment or a sentimental wave. It would mean choosing vulnerability. It would mean acknowledging that somewhere deep down, she still cared. That she still wanted something from her mother. Connection, closure, maybe even comfort. It would mean opening a door she had spent years keeping locked. Her suitcase was dusty. She hadn't used it in months. She didn't pack much, just a few layers. A sweater her mother had given her years ago, still folded in the back of her closet. She considered throwing it out more than once, but she never could. Why had she kept it? Because even though she told herself she didn't care, she never quite stopped hoping. The sweater, with its soft threads and fading scent, was a link to a time before everything fell apart, a time when love was simpler, or at least easier to believe in. Keeping it was like keeping a piece of her mother that didn't argue, didn't judge, didn't make her feel small. It reminded her that once upon a time, she was loved without all the noise. Maybe part of her had been waiting for a moment just like this. Maybe it was a thread she couldn't quite sever. A quiet belief that someday, maybe, she'd need it. And today was that day. The weight of the letter, the ache in her chest, the pull she couldn't ignore. It had all brought her here, to this moment where memory, hope, and decision finally met. She sat on the edge of her bed, suitcase beside her, heart thudding. She reached over and grabbed a scarf, one Tessa had knitted for her in high school. It still smelled like cedar from the old chest where she kept it. Pulling it around her neck, she felt something she hadn't in years. Warmth that wasn't manufactured by a radiator or a routine, but by memory. By the time she zipped the suitcase and pulled on her boots, her hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but from the weight of everything this moment carried. It was the fear of reopening old wounds, the fear of being turned away, the fear that she had waited too long. But it was also adrenaline, because underneath the fear was a flicker of hope she couldn't smother. This wasn't just about a visit. It was about stepping back into a story she had closed too soon, and she didn't know what kind of ending waited on the other side. It wasn't just the idea of seeing her mother. It was the risk of being seen herself, with all her cracks and questions and years of silence. What if Tessa looked at her and saw only disappointment? What if she didn't recognize her anymore? What if Harper didn't recognize herself anymore? She had spent so many years trying to be strong, independent, untouched by the past. She had built a life far from where it all started, shedding parts of herself like old skin just to survive. But now, standing on the edge of something tender and unfinished, she wondered if she'd buried parts of herself too deep, Kindness, softness, trust. What if in running from pain she had also run from who she used to be? She stood in the hallway for a full minute, key in hand, heart pounding, and then she walked out the door. The train platform was nearly empty. The snow made everything feel softer, slower. Harper pulled her coat tighter and watched the track. She kept touching her phone, debating whether to text her mom. Just something short. "I'm coming." But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Why not? Because texting meant commitment. And commitment meant risk. Saying she was coming made it real, and if she backed out, it would hurt more. So she waited in silence. The train pulled in, doors whooshing open. She stepped on and found a window seat, set her bag down, watched the city slide past in shades of gray and white. The ride was quiet. Inside her, it wasn't. She remembered Thanksgivings past, her mom's cranberry sauce, always made from scratch, the mismatched chairs, the music Tessa played while she cooked. Harper used to hum along. And those floral plates, slightly chipped around the edges, handed down from her grandmother. Tessa only brought them out once a year, gently unwrapping each one from its quilted cover, as if preparing for something sacred. Somehow, just picturing them made Harper feel like she belonged to something again. They used to laugh, and then, they didn't. She thought about the moment the warmth disappeared from their conversations, the moment she stopped feeling like she could be honest without being corrected. That was the beginning of the distance. Not a single moment, but a slow erosion. She leaned her head against the window. Why was she doing this now? Because something in her was finally tired of running. Tired of pretending she didn't miss the woman who raised her. Tired of letting pride win. And because somewhere deep inside, she knew the healing had already begun. Not in big, sweeping declarations, but in quiet decisions. In holding on to the scarf. In rereading the letter. In buying the train ticket. Every small step was a stitch, slowly mending the tear between them. She thought about the years she had missed, the birthdays not called, the silence she had kept like armor. Every time Tessa sent a letter, Harper felt the battle between self-protection and longing. She always chose protection. Until now. Now, her longing had grown louder than her fear. She wasn't sure what hurt more, what had happened between them, or all the moments that never had a chance to. The train slowed. Her stop was next. She wiped her palms on her jeans. Her heart thudded. Every part of her wanted to run. But somehow, she stayed seated. And when the train pulled into the station, she stood up and stepped off. The town looked smaller than she remembered. Familiar and strange all at once. She walked the old streets with snow crunching beneath her boots, pulling her suitcase behind her. People passed her with pies and folded chairs and holiday chatter. It was Thanksgiving, and here she was, wandering into her past. Every storefront window brought a memory. The corner cafe where she and her mom used to get muffins after church. The pharmacy where they picked up birthday cards. The park where Harper had scraped her knee, and her mom had knelt down in the dirt to bandage it. She hadn't just left her mother. She had left this whole world behind. And now she was walking back through it like a ghost. As she walked, she noticed things she hadn't appreciated before. The crack in the sidewalk outside the bakery, still there after all these years. The tree where they took her first day of school photos. The little library box someone had added in front of the park. It all felt like fragments of a story she used to belong to, a story she wasn't sure she could re-enter. She passed a group of kids building a snowman, their laughter cutting through the still air. One of them looked up and waved. Harper smiled, surprised by the reflex. It felt strange, how something as small as a child's smile could pierce the armor she'd built so carefully. She wondered if her mom had smiled at strangers like that, even in the years Harper was gone. There were so many things she didn't know. Had her mother changed? Had she aged more than Harper imagined? Did she still bake on Sundays? Did she still keep Harper's old room the way it was? Or had she quietly packed it all away? The old house came into view. White porch, faded wreath, wind chimes that hadn't changed. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. She could leave now. Turn around. Tell herself she tried. But then she imagined the table. 3 plates. 1 empty. The third plate wasn't just a symbol. It was a declaration. A quiet, steady hope that hadn't packed up and moved on. Tessa's faithfulness felt like a soft rebuke to every excuse Harper had ever made. That plate, floral and chipped, sitting on the lace mat next to the candied yams and the linen napkin folded just so, it was more than a place setting. It was a place held. A promise that the door wasn't locked, that the welcome never expired. That table wasn't waiting for closure. It was waiting for return. And she climbed the stairs. Every step felt like a choice. She remembered the last time she had been on this porch. Shouting, tears in her eyes, her mother reaching out and Harper pulling away. What if that same rejection waited behind the door? But what if it didn't? What if Grace really was still sitting at that table? She stood in front of the door, her hand raised but not knocking. She could hear faint movement inside. A clink of silverware. The low hum of music. Her heart ached. She could turn and leave and no one would know. But she would know. She would know that she had walked to the edge and stepped back. That when Grace stretched out a hand, she had let fear fold hers. No one else needed to see it. No one else needed to judge it. But deep inside, in the quietest place of her heart, she would carry the weight of the choice not made. That's what made it sacred and terrifying. Because it wasn't about anyone else's forgiveness or anyone else's eyes. It was about her own. She looked down at her boots, at the dusting of snow on the porch rail, at the brass doorknob she hadn't touched in 12 years. Then she closed her eyes, took a breath, and knocked once. Then again. And that's where we leave her, on a snowy porch, suitcase in hand, memories colliding with the present. Not yet embraced. Not yet forgiven. But brave enough to knock. Because sometimes the door to healing doesn't open from within. It opens when someone dares to come back and try again. End of part 2. Struggle. Stay tuned for part 3. Showing up. Grace doesn't always knock. Sometimes it waits. Part 3. Showing up shame, struggle, and showing up. A daughter's journey back to Grace. The door opened slowly. It wasn't dramatic. There were no gasps or embraces, just the quiet creak of hinges and the familiar face of a woman who had waited 12 years for this moment. Tessa stood there, holding a dish towel, flour still on her hands. Her eyes widened, not in shock, but in something gentler, a kind of quiet awe. "Hi," Harper said, voice barely above a whisper. Tessa blinked once, then again. Her lips parted, but no sound came. It wasn't that she didn't have anything to say. Her heart was full, words teetering on the edge of emotion. But for once, she understood that this wasn't the moment for speeches. It was the moment to make space. All the letters, the prayers, the thanksgivings with an empty plate. This was the answer to all of it. Her silence was reverent, a sacred pause. And then, almost without realizing it, she stepped aside and opened the door wider. Harper crossed the threshold. The warmth hit her first, not just the physical heat from the oven, but the warmth of memory. The house smelled like cinnamon, butter, and roasted turkey. The floor creaked in the same places. The walls still held the same pale yellow. She stood just inside, suitcase in hand, heart in her throat. Tessa didn't reach for her. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "You came." Harper nodded, her voice catching. I didn't know if you would open the door. Tessa looked at her, eyes soft. I didn't either. Not because I wouldn't have let you in. I always would have. But because I wasn't sure you'd ever come. I wasn't sure I'd ever get to say yes. The truth hung in the air between them. Neither woman had been sure this moment would come, and even now that it had, neither quite knew what to do with it. But they were here, and that was something. Silence settled between them, thick and strange. Not the bitter silence of old arguments, but the kind that comes when hearts don't know what words to use yet. Tessa glanced at the suitcase. Your room's still the same, if you want to put that down. Harper hesitated, then nodded and walked down the hallway, the wheels of the suitcase bumping along the familiar ridges of the hardwood floor. She opened the door to her old room and stood there. The bedspread hadn't changed. Neither had the posters on the wall. A stack of books sat on the nightstand, their spines faded with time. On the dresser, a photo of the two of them, taken the summer before everything changed. Harper touched the edge of the frame. Her throat tightened. She didn't unpack. Not because she was unsure about staying, but because unpacking felt too final, too soon. She needed to ease into this moment, to let it breathe. The suitcase, still zipped and waiting by the door, was a kind of quiet bridge between the past and whatever might come next. She returned to the kitchen instead, where the warmth was steady and the pie was nearly ready. Tessa was pulling a pie out of the oven. Pumpkin, your favorite. Harper smiled faintly. Still is. They stood across the kitchen from each other, two women separated by a decade of silence and 1,000 unsaid things. Harper's heart was a mix of fear and fragile hope, unsure if she belonged in this familiar room. Tessa, meanwhile, felt the ache of time past, her hands busy but her soul still, afraid to say too much and risk the moment slipping away. They were both waiting, each hoping the other would take a first step towards something neither of them could quite name yet. Would you like to help me set the table? Tessa asked. Harper nodded. The plates were the same, floral and faded, slightly chipped. Harper unwrapped them one by one, just like she remembered her mother doing every Thanksgiving. The pattern was still there, small blue violets curling around the edges, the kind you only noticed if you looked close. She remembered helping wash them as a child, how her mom always said they were too delicate for the dishwasher. Each plate felt like a small act of reconciliation, a bridge between then and now, between silence and this quiet attempt at repair. As she set each one down, she wondered how many times her mother had done this alone, still hoping, still waiting. The plates weren't just dishes. They were symbols of something unbroken, even when everything else had been. As Harper reached for the silverware drawer, she paused. Her hand lingered on the handle. She remembered when she was 10, racing into the kitchen to set the table before her cousins arrived, how proud she'd felt when her mom told her she had an eye for detail. It felt like another lifetime. They didn't talk much, just moved together in a quiet rhythm, setting forks, folding napkins, lighting candles. And with each small gesture, each shared task, each careful movement, something inside them softened. Every ordinary action became a stitch in the mending, slowly thawing what had been frozen. The third place setting went at the end, across from Tessa. Harper placed it down gently, smoothing the linen napkin. It wasn't just a table anymore. It was a table set for healing. That's when it hit her. This was the plate. The one her mother had mentioned in the letter. The one set with hope. She blinked hard, willing the tears not to fall. Still 3, Tessa said, noticing. I never stopped. Her voice was steady, but behind it was a well of quiet faith. She had kept setting that third place not because she expected a miracle, but because she believed in leaving the door open for one. It was her way of saying, I'm still here. You're still welcome. Year after year, She chose hope over finality, an act of love disguised as routine. The lump in Harper's throat grew. She turned away, pretending to adjust a chair. But inside, something was breaking open, a soft place that hadn't been touched in years. Dinner was quiet at first. Grace was said. Plates were passed, bites were taken. It felt like walking on ice, every word cautious, every glance uncertain. But then, as the candles burned lower and the pie was sliced, something shifted. It wasn't a grand moment or a sudden revelation. It was the way Harper caught her mother smiling softly when she thought no one was looking. The way Harper's shoulders relaxed, just a little, as if her heart had stopped bracing for impact. It was laughter, tentative at first, sparked by a shared memory about Harper's first disastrous attempt at baking. And then another story followed, and another. Each one peeled back a layer of guardedness. The shift was quiet, almost imperceptible, but real. A crack in the dam of distance, a thawing in the air. The warmth wasn't just from the oven now, it was between them, shared, growing. Tessa reached across the table and touched Harper's hand. "I know I wasn't always the mother you needed." Harper looked up. "I didn't know how to love you when you pulled away. I didn't know how to fight for you without pushing you further. I made mistakes. But I never stopped loving you." Harper's lip trembled. "I said horrible things. We both did. I left. I know. But I didn't stop loving you either." Tessa's eyes shone. "I hoped." Her voice was soft but certain. "I hoped with every letter, with every empty plate I set, with every prayer I whispered when no one else was listening." Harper blinked back tears. "I didn't know how to come back." "You just did." They sat in silence again. But this one was different. This was the silence of something sacred settling into place. It wrapped around them like a gentle benediction, not demanding words, just presence. In that quiet, healing began to weave itself into the cracks. Not loudly, not all at once, but like morning light creeping into a dark room. They didn't need to name it. They just needed to let it exist, let it do its slow, sacred work. And in that stillness, something fragile but hopeful took root. A quiet agreement that maybe, just maybe, this time they wouldn't let love slip away so easily. Later, Harper stood by the kitchen sink, looking out at the snow. The window fogged slightly from the warmth inside. She could see the outline of the garden where she used to pick tomatoes and chase fireflies. It was covered in white now, but still familiar. Still waiting. Tessa came beside her. "You didn't have to come." "I did." "Why now?" Harper turned to face her. "Because I realized Grace wasn't going to chase me down. Sometimes you have to go back to where it was last waiting." Tessa nodded slowly. "I'm glad you did." They didn't hug. Not yet. But the space between them had changed. That night, Harper stayed in her old room. As she lay under the worn quilt, listening to the distant hum of the heater, memories drifted in like soft wind. Her mom brushing her hair before bed, the late-night talks after bad dreams, the way Tessa used to sit beside her at piano recitals, squeezing her hand before she played. They talked into the early morning, about Harper's job, about Tessa's garden, about what they'd both lost, and what they might still have time to reclaim. Tessa confessed she almost stopped writing letters. But something in me said to keep setting the plate, just in case. Harper swallowed the knot in her throat. That letter, it didn't just reach my mailbox. It reached me. In the middle of my numb routines, my long silences, my rehearsed indifference, it slipped past all of it. It made me stop pretending I was fine, made me remember there was still a part of me that ached for something more, for someone more. In the quiet that followed, Harper lay awake in her old bed. The walls didn't feel as foreign now. The air didn't feel as heavy. She realized she wasn't just visiting her mother, she was visiting herself, the version she had buried in hurt and pride, the version who still believed in second chances. And she hadn't known how much she missed that girl, the one who used to sing while setting the table, the one who believed love could wait forever. As sleep settled in, Harper thought about tomorrow, about coffee in the kitchen, about what it might feel like to stay for more than a meal. There were no guarantees, no promises. But there was something new growing in the space between them. It wasn't just reconciliation, it was rediscovery. She wasn't sure what would happen next. She didn't know how many visits it would take, or what healing might look like in the light of day. But tonight, she had shown up. And that was something. And that's where we leave her. Wrapped in an old quilt, a plate washed and waiting in the dish rack, and the faint hum of music drifting down the hallway. Not yet whole, not yet healed, but home. Because sometimes showing up doesn't fix everything. Sometimes it just begins it. The next Sunday, Harper showed up again. No suitcase this time, just a pie in her hands and a heart a little less guarded. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the returning, in the ordinary moments that start to feel safe again. And this time, the third plate wasn't set in hope. It was set in joy, the end. Thank you for spending time with us here on Karma, Kindness, and Consequences. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing for more soul-stirring journeys that remind us grace can still find a way.